So, you've seen the thumbnail, you saw the title. I feel like I have to explain. And I'll just say it. Star Trek Picard Season 2 was a mess.
That's been clear to both of us for some time now, I imagine. Going forward, it would all be too awkward.
Like, messier than the entire planet of Vulcan on Ponfar weekend. All those shaky bells everywhere. And I want to be clear that me saying that is not coming from a place of anger or vitriol or hatred or anything like that. In fact, I was actually deeply looking forward to this season of Star Trek Picard. I've made no bones, no pun intended, about the fact that I had issues with Star Trek Picard Season 1. Anyone remember Narek?
Let's change the subject.
Yeah, I'd try to forget about him too. But there was stuff that I really enjoyed in that season too, like the character of Rios, the world building aspect of the show, and the series' willingness to take risks, to try new things, to boldly go, even if those things didn't always pan out. And with the new showrunner in for season 2 of Picard, and with my awareness that all Trek shows take a little bit of time to get off the ground, I was honestly really stoked for this season. And it really started off strong. I mean, look at all those starships! All those juicy, sexy starships. But sadly, as the season kept going, the trust that I had placed in its initial episodes to lead me on a storytelling journey that I felt would be worthwhile and thought out, sadly didn't prove to be the case. This season was sadly filled with meandering plots, aimless character arcs, reiterative story beats, and some of the worst cynical Easter egg nonsense that I've seen in a long while. Oh, we'll get to it. We will get to it. But while this season is probably honestly my least favorite of this modern era of Star Trek, and I am going to spend this entire video being heavily critical of the season, I also want to be clear that I also found a lot to love this season as well. Despite its very clear problems, this season's thematic focus on recontextualizing trauma and finding an acceptance in the wholly imperfect being that is yourself came from a place of emotional truth and vulnerability, and, at moments, allowed this season to truly shine, even if only briefly. So, I promise, as I always try to do in all of my reviews, we'll find the positives. But sadly, in order to discuss the nuance of all of it, we must accept the totality of both the season's numerous flaws, as well as its successes, even if they never allow the season to become greater than the sum of its parts.
Take it back to a golden age, with the music plus swinging and the dancers swayed. You're not the best, you are the cabaret. You should totally screw around the way you move.
But before we get into the sexy starships of Star Trek Picard, I want to quick tell you about two important things. The first is about this video in general. As many of you know, I love just a little bit talking about Star Trek. But sadly, sometimes these videos aren't always as algorithm friendly as some other videos with more clickbaity hot takes about the franchise who have to put up everything in hyperbolicized terms, or videos that are about more controversial topics surrounding discussions like trans issues, for example, that I do a lot on this channel. And so that's why my fellow video creators and I have Nebula, which is an online video streaming service made where we don't have to worry about the dreaded algorithms, and just like a Horta who just mind melded with Spock, our videos can fly free. And there are tons of great creators like myself on the Streamy award-nominated platform like FD Signifier, Lily Alexander, and PhilosophyTube. And I even have some Nebula exclusive videos on there already and coming out soon. Maybe in a certain Sex and Star Trek series, maybe, possibly? But one of the major ways that Nebula is itself supported is through its partnership with the amazing service CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service with thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles. In fact, one that I recently watched that I've talked about before on this channel was The First Picture of a Black Hole, about how scientists got the first picture of a black hole. And it was a perfect way for me to spend my time between watching new episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds until I could stare again into the beautiful black holes of Ethan Peck's eyes. So it's an awesome service, and even better, Nebula and CuriosityStream have formed together to help each other out. They've worked out a deal where if you sign up with my link below, not only do you get access to CuriosityStream, but you'll also get Nebula for free. It's not a trial, not a test, but a full Nebula access as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. Also, for a limited time, CuriosityStream is offering an exclusive discount for the annual plan at 26%. So just $14.97 for an annual plan. That's pretty cheap for how much of my beautiful face you're gonna be getting in it, and also the beautiful faces of many other wonderful people. So use the URL below to get some cool documentaries, access to Nebula, and also just help me out. So with all that said, thank you so much to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video. But with that being said, I also want to take a quick second to just shout out that I have been working recently with the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, which is a free text message-based confidential emotional support hotline created to help those in the gaming community, be they developers, players, or streamers, or more, to offer emotional support and provide resources to you. Sadly, as I know from personal experience, things like abuse, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, as well as general harassment and other things like racism are sometimes too common in certain areas of the gaming world. So if any of you are experiencing any of those sort of things in the gaming world and you need support, and it is totally okay to need support, please consider reaching out to the Games and Online Harassment Hotline at the number below to get started, and also the number and information about the hotline is in the description. Just check that out if you need it. I think it's a really important thing that they're doing there. But with all that being said, to move on to something possibly happier, let's get into this season of Picard, which was messier than Jessie after a single glass of Romulan ale. As I said before, Season 1 of Star Trek Picard was deeply frustrating for me and many Trek fans. While you can check out this video for my further thoughts on that, my overriding criticism of that season was that it felt like it had so many good ideas and not enough time to develop them. And so it opted for the easy route in wrapping them all up to fit it into 10 episodes instead of allowing for a more complex and thoughtful exploration. 7 of 9 becoming the Borg Queen, reflecting her inner fear of her Borg half? Forgotten by the end of that episode.
Are you gonna assimilate me now?
Annika still has work to do.
A discussion of the underlying prejudice throughout the Federation against synthetic life forms that we've seen throughout the Next Generation, crystallizing in a terrorist attack culminating in a synth ban that mirrored post-9/11 anti-Muslim fear-mongering. Offhandedly redacted at the end of the season.
And now that they've lifted the ban on synthetics, I'm free to travel.
Picard abdicating his fight for the rights of Romulan refugees, leaving them to be disenfranchised and left in squalor, and former Borg drones being left in the prejudicial care of those Romulans. All forgotten because we need a big shooty battle at the end.
Prepare to fight.
None of those ideas were bad. In fact, they were all quite amazing, actually, in my mind, but it was perfectly clear that the show didn't know how to entirely weave them all into the story that it wanted to tell. And I chalk this mostly up to 2 reasons. One, the showrunner at the time, Michael Chabon, is an excellent novelist who wrote Cavalier and Clay, but not a TV writer, and so was used to having more room to explore more meandering plot threads. Which leads me to 2, which is a problem that I also have with this show's contemporary Star Trek Discovery, is the lack of planning out the end of their story before they start filming the beginning of the season. Literally, the entirety of my issues with modern Trek serialized storytelling often comes down not to the serialization itself, but the fact that studios often force these shows to begin production before the writers have actually finished writing their entire season, forcing the writers to hope they can pay off their plot threads in a satisfying way because they can't go back and better seed their stories in earlier episodes because they already had to film them, or force these writers to write their stories so nebulously that they can fit in whatever ending they want once they're done. But despite its messiness though, Season 1 of Picard did have strong foundations. I love the characters of Rios, Raffi, and Jurati, and while they were not explored as well as I could have been, I did enjoy the arcs that legacy characters 7 of 9 and Picard have been taken on. Like most of Season 1 of Trek shows, it may have had wonky storytelling, but it was built on a solid foundation. Which was why I got incredibly excited for Star Trek Picard Season 2, because the series had a new showrunner in Terry Matalas, the creator of the wonderfully bonkers 12 Monkeys TV series, and while horrible that it had to happen this way, the pandemic had given the writers more time to finish the scripts before Picard Season 2 actually went into production. Even executive producer Akiva Goldsman said this in an interview when asked what he had learned from Season 1.
The lesson I learned from Season 1 is figure out the end earlier. If you're going to do a serialized show, you have the whole story before you start shooting. It's more like a movie in that way. You better know the end of your third act before you start filming your first scene.
All of this told me that this season was going to be tight, concise, and to the point. And then, sadly, the actual season happened. To be fair, Season 2 started off strong and had me incredibly excited. The first episode addressed many of the more superficial concerns that fans and haters alike had about Season 1. We got to see a more optimistic Starfleet and Federation that had slightly moved past its Season 1 hawkishness. We even got all the Starfleet ship designs, like all of them, using amazing fan-loved designs from Star Trek Online, even if they didn't have carpets on the inside. That's the real mystery of the season. What happened to the carpeting? Hell, we even got a Borg vagina ship in the premiere, which I loved to death. I mean, Borg cube, Borg sphere, Borg clitoris. Truly, the Borg seek perfection. And while the episode spent most of its time setting up the season's status quo, it ended on a doozy of a cliffhanger that gave our characters an intriguing mystery and a clear goal. Something strange was up with the Borg wanting to enter the Federation, and now Picard and his friends were trapped in a dark fascist discount mirror universe seemingly caused by Q, played by the amazing as ever returning John Delancey. Also, they did the thing that every fan wanted them to do to explain how the ageless Q looked older.
You're a bit older than I imagined. Let me catch up. There.
And episode 2 continued this great trend. Not only did it have some really dark and cool Easter eggs, I mean, Skull Dukat, anyone?
Guldukat. Executed in the Ithian forests, just outside the capital city, put up a hell of a fight.
But furthered the mystery. What was wrong with Q? Why did he place Picard here? What penance was Picard paying for? And the episode also gave us a clear goal for our characters. Go back in time and stop whatever caused this fascist future. Sadly, it wasn't because of the whales. Oh, also, this episode gave us Picard doing his best pumping fist move for a crowd of violent, murderous fascist stands about to genocide the Borg, which was oddly more hilarious than its description implies. And on top of all of this, these episodes established a strong thematic drive for the season, recontextualizing your trauma. Picard had refused to enter a relationship with Laris because, as we learn, there was something in his past that held him back from engaging with others romantically. Like Season 1's deconstruction of a Picard who never stayed in one place long enough to deal with the consequences of his actions on the people that he affected, this theme in Season 2 fit the Picard that we had come to know over 7 seasons of The Next Generation, and provided a new avenue to explore with the character.
You always talk about love as if you ever took it seriously. And you know the only things you've ever put out there to break were your bones.
Additionally, this trauma recontextualization also was mirrored in the plot itself, with us learning that the dark future that Picard was in was caused by a moment in Earth's past right before the canonical World War III, as humanity began to head down a darker path and could either turn towards the light of the Federation or the dark of the Confederation. It was great ground to cover, both in the characters and the story, and one which would speak to our world today, which itself feels like it's going through numerous personal and societal traumas like the pandemic or attacks on women's rights, or more, that could lead us to a brighter future or a darker one. However, once things got back to the near future of 2024, things immediately fell apart, because it became entirely clear that the series kind of was meandering at this point. While the characters ostensibly had the goal to find the Watcher hinted at by the Borg Queen, the writers kept sending the characters through roundabout storylines so they could keep running in place. Seven and Raffi spend an episode climbing a tower to get a signal. Rios gets injured because the transporter screwed up. So he spends an entire episode in a hospital, then he gets captured by ICE for an entire episode, then immediately gets released the next episode and forgets the entire experience. We even had a story where Picard and Guinan got arrested by a discount FBI agent Mulder to be interrogated for an entire episode, only to be released and let go right back where they were at the end of the last episode. The characters kept going round and round, doing nothing much of consequence, while we as the audience were trying to figure out what the actual goal was to stop the future from changing. And to a degree, these divergences would have been fine if they had led anywhere or explored interesting concepts, but the show seemed to entirely ignore them once they were done with the plots. For example, Rios getting captured by ICE could have been a commentary on the way we dehumanize immigrants in the United States and the trauma it can cause, tying into the season's themes, not to mention tying something happening today into Trek canon with Deep Space Nine's homeless sanctuary zones that we saw referenced nicely in episode 3, showing how ICE's cages were predicted by Deep Space Nine back in the 90s with its prescient storyline. But nah, Rio seems to have no opinion on being detained by ICE, ranting about how much he loves present-day Earth literally an episode later.
21st century Earth isn't what I thought it would be. Everything's so intense. All the cars and the honking and shouting. It's dirty. Music everywhere. Oh, the food is amazing. Slap on a badge, put on a uniform. You think you can treat people this way?
He just seems to have forgotten the whole experience, and there's no real commentary in the show about it. It just made the storyline, which could have been incredibly pertinent, feel superfluous. This isn't to say that there weren't nice moments within there. Some of these side trips allowed for nice ruminations on the themes of recontextualizing trauma, like the FBI agent being able to realize that his childhood fear of Vulcans that had defined his career path wasn't as scary as he had thought.
He wasn't a monster. He was a Vulcan. And He wasn't trying to kill you. He was trying to mind meld.
Though I will say Vulcan's trying to forcibly mind meld with you is still a little bit scary, but I get what the show is going for. And there was also a wonderful targeted talk that Picard had with Guinan, and by the way, the actor who played younger Guinan was amazing, about believing that the horrors that humanity was going through in the early 24th century that we today are actually dealing with, while not acceptable, should not let Guinan, and vicariously us in the audience, fall into doomerism, but still hope and fight for that better tomorrow of Star Trek.
But the hatred here, it never ends. Just swaps clothes. This century, took off a hood and put on a suit. You say change is coming? Well, it's too damn slow, and the cost way too high. And being forced to watch it hurts.
History's darkest moments can be a tipping point for change. There's still good here.
And we also have Rios having a lovely little romance with the Dr. Teresa in an homage to Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home.
I'm from Chile. I work in outer space.
But that's all these plots led to. Nice little lovely moments. The plots themselves, though, went nowhere and felt aimless. And we could see this aimlessness not just in the side storylines, but even in the main arc of the show. Take episode 6's 2 of 1, where the crew infiltrates a gala because they need to talk to Picard's ancestor, Renee, who they finally figured out, because Q was messing with her for some reason, that she was somehow part of this future change. How she was part of the future change was unclear, and it wouldn't be made clear until it was literally just told to us in episode 8.
Renee Picard either boards a spaceship and makes a discovery that renders your work obsolete, or doesn't. If she doesn't, I've seen the result. Earth, in your time, finds itself in ecological freefall. The man they turn to is you.
But nevertheless, this gala storyline was an incredibly cool concept. It's a heist storyline, and those are always fun, but they are predicated on clear expectations and goals being communicated to the audience. A good heist plot sets up the plan for the audience, then as the characters enact the plan, things go wrong, thus creating tension and intrigue for the viewer. I mean, even season 1 of Picard had, while not a great example, a decent heist storyline where Raffi narrates their heist plan as we see it enacted and going off the rails from time to time.
Feeling lucky, Mr. Rios.
Try to stay away from the lizard. Beta and Nari can smell when you're not telling the truth.
Seriously?
Also what you had for dinner, and the last person you had sex with.
If they're not the same thing.
Because that's not disturbing.
I'm Mr. Fuck.
Of course you are. Salutations.
It's setup, then subversion of expectation, then forcing the characters to have to zig instead of the planned zag, creating tension as they steer back on course, all trying to lead to their ultimate goal. But after a decent start to this storyline, where Jurati had to give in a little bit to the Borg Queen, who was now starting to assimilate her in order to keep their plan moving along.
Fine, I give up. Help me. Oh.
We spend the rest of the episode with the characters just aimlessly spending time at the party. I mean, Rios is just smoking cigars and Seven's literally over here chatting it up with some random extras just because. What are you doing, Seven? What's going on over there? The one moment of tension in this entire storyline comes when Picard just decides he's gonna walk over to Renee, which is the entirety of their plan, and gets stopped by Brent Spiner playing yet another Soon character in Star Trek lore. Drat, my complicated plan of just walking over and talking to her got foiled. But it's then after that conversation that Soon tries to have Picard thrown out of the gala, which should have worked, by the way, but then Jurati has to sing a song with a well-placed spotlight to distract everyone. In a admittedly cool scene, it was nice seeing the Borg Queen do a little song and dance number, but this seemingly stopped the guards caring about Picard entirely, apparently. Oh, and a little side note, a lot of people made fun of the fact that the spotlight was ready to shine on Jurati instantaneously, but I'm fine with that. As a former theater kid myself, I know that we are always ready to shine a light on a woman spontaneously bursting into song. We got you, fam. Be the best Jurati you can be. But on top of all this aimless plotting, the story itself seemed not to care about its own stakes. The show set up that we really needed to worry about butterflies, events that change the future.
Don't draw attention to yourself. No hospitals, no authorities, no security checkpoints, anything that can scan you. It can find the ID implants and vaccination chips from a future that doesn't exist yet.
I understand.
And the show pays lip service to that from time to time, what with things like Rios losing his futuristic comm badge, but all of that just gets yada yada patched up in a single line in the finale.
Tricorder, a couple of comm badges, a broken phaser. I think that's all of it. Every butterfly I could find.
But despite caring deeply about those smaller things, the show will suddenly just not care about even bigger issues that might cause butterflies, like these Borgified tactical officers getting killed.
Well, we seem to be regaining the advantage.
Or this FBI agent getting fired, this bar having to spend money on a new window which may bankrupt it, or a truck full of ICE detainees who presumably would have gotten deported being set free because of Seven and Raffi's intervention. Like, I'm not saying I wanted these immigrants to be deported at all in the storyline, but it showcases how the show doesn't follow through on its own setups, deflating any tension that the show wants me to feel elsewhere from that same sort of story beat. Why do I care if Rios' comm badge is missing if literally these people who would have led full lives presumably are now dead? That seems to be a much bigger deal to me. And yes, the show does account for it a bit by saying that it was meant to happen.
I remember family stories of how the chateau got shot up when my ancestors were reoccupying it in the 21st century. These are the same bullet holes.
But if that's the case, why make a big deal of butterflies at all? The show also distractingly tried to cram in a bunch of actors that it couldn't fit elsewhere in the story. Brent Spiner, Issa Briones, and Orla Brady are all here playing different characters from their characters that we got to meet in season 1, to varying degrees of success. For example, conceptually, I like Soon. The idea of an Elon Musk-esque billionaire whining about the importance of his legacy, which, as we learn, is in part what enables the fastest future that we come to see.
Or the promise of legacy reveals the rot that is hidden underneath it.
I know a future worth fighting for.
So do I.
Feels like it should be a biting critique on capitalism today, one that fits in with the Soon family canon of Star Trek lore about caring more about self-legacy and altering humanity without care of ethics that we saw throughout Star Trek The Next Generation and even Enterprise.
Why invest so much time and energy on things no one will ever use?
How can a supposedly intelligent species reject technology that would enhance ability, relieve suffering?
Genetic engineering has caused a lot of suffering.
So did splitting the atom. And yet the first ships to colonize the solar system were nuclear powered. But you're not here to discuss that.
But in the end, Soon just comes across as a lame villain throughout, doing really nothing of consequence except monologue or run over Picard at one point. And I also never ended up caring much at all about his genetically engineered daughter, Kore. I also love the concept of Talon, who is a character that builds upon one of my favorite odd, unexplored pieces of lore from Star Trek the original series, the backdoor pilot episode Assignment Earth that was Gene Roddenberry's attempt to make another show if Star Trek failed. Here, Talon is one of these same supervisors that Gary Seven was in that episode. I just love that this was a piece of Star Trek lore that the show decided to explore. But even she ultimately feels kinda superfluous, just mostly being a way to get Picard plot-relevant info about Renee, or be an audience surrogate for Picard's trauma later on. And on top of this, while I don't mind Trek actors playing multiple roles, it's a time-honored Trek tradition, especially for Spiner, but while I can buy that for Soon and Kore to a degree, Talon's direct resemblance to Picard's future love interest Laris is so tenuously justified, I honestly wish they had just recast or not acknowledged the similarity at all.
I knew it. You could be an ancestor.
Speaking of lore though, let me talk a little bit about Easter eggs. Now, I don't mind a good Easter egg. Hell, I adore Star Trek Lower Decks, so I'm not one to complain about them. But a good Easter egg should either be background or build upon established lore. A good one, for example, is Guinan at the start of the season having a bar in the future called 10 Forward, referring to her time as Enterprise's bartender in 10 Forward. It's cute and inconsequential. Or you have 7 of 9 mentioning Janeway fighting for her to enter Starfleet.
Should have joined Starfleet.
I tried. After Voyager. Starfleet shut me down because
You were Borg?
Janeway went to bat for me, threatened to resign, but I gave it up, went full Ranger.
And I like this one because it actually was an Easter egg that built upon lore, because it made sense that a hawkish post-Dominion War and just before the synth-banned Starfleet would be prejudiced against synth-like life forms like the Borg, especially after multiple Borg invasions. And by the way, it didn't bother me that Icheb got into Starfleet in season 1 of Picard, because maybe Janeway getting the younger, less Borgified Icheb was the only compromise she could win, and not with Seven. And there are plenty of things like novels that can explore these small inconsistencies. That being said though, Easter eggs that distract from the plot or feel so cynical, those I have issues with. And this season had a lot of them. Like for example, when Picard goes back in time, he finds that Guinan still had the 10 forward bar, despite this being long before she was ever on the Enterprise. That just feels weird because the reason that the bar on the Enterprise was named 10 forward wasn't because she was referencing a bar, but because the bar was at the forward of deck 10. So this Easter egg just makes no logical sense. But that one's just honestly a minor inconsistency, but it is not as bad as my worst one, because at the end of the season, Soon, after being defeated, pulls out a folder from his drawer named Project Khan.
My name is Khan.
This one almost made my eyes roll back in my head, because it reeks of cynical thinking. Clearly, this is meant to allude to the eugenics wars and Khan Noonien Singh, the villain from the original series and the movie Wrath of Khan. And it's just so clearly labeled Project Khan so that the audience will go, ooh, look, it's Khan, we know who that is. And it's got this dark and overly dramatic music behind it, and it just frustrated the hell out of me. Like one, Khan was just one of many genetically engineered people, and also the name Khan was just a title that he took to prove his superiority. Why would Soon have a folder marked Khan? Like, don't get me wrong, it makes perfect sense to me that Soon would work on something that led to the eugenics wars that ultimately led to Khan himself, but then why not have the folder say eugenics something on it? Saying Khan on the folder just reeks of this cynical studio executive thinking that also gave us the photo of young Picard in Star Trek Nemesis being bald, because how will we ever know that that was Picard if he wasn't bald? It's just moments like that that don't trust the audience to just get it, and pulls me out of the story. Not to mention that some Easter eggs actually ruin the story's logic. Like for example, when Picard meets past Guinan, she doesn't remember him despite them having met in the time travel episode Time Zero. But that makes sense given that the timeline had changed, so Picard may have never gone back in time to meet her in this timeline. And I like that the writers thought that through, they even said as much in an interview. But if that's the case, why did, in that same episode, this guy from Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, who was there to do a nice callback, seemingly remember getting nerve pinched by Spock from that same movie?
Yeah, okay, fine! I just like that song. Okay, I'm sorry.
Presumably, if the timeline had changed, that version of Spock wouldn't have gone back in time to save the whales. It just ruins the logic. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you can't make this work plot-wise. Like, Trekkies are really good at making inconsistencies like this make sense in our minds. Like, for example, maybe Guinan named the bar 10 forward because she got vibes from the future because she's an Elorian. Or maybe the Confederation version of Kirk and Spock also went back in time to save the whales, but Picard didn't for Time Zero. But that being said, it is frustrating that these Easter eggs just throw you out of the story for a silly little moment. Finally though, the story doesn't really do a good job building up what it tries to pay off later. For example, we get things like the Borg Queen saying, "One Renee must live, one must die."
To succeed, there must be two Renees. One who lives, and another who dies.
Which we eventually learn is an allusion to Talon needing to pretend to be Renee in order to sacrifice herself to save the girl and the future. But like, number one, why would the Borg Queen know that? Number two, why couldn't Talon just possess Soon like we saw her doing literally a few episodes before, or just knock him out instead of killing herself? And three, this ability for her to look like other people was never established anywhere else in the season. Like not even when she snuck into the gala where it would have made sense for her to do so. So it's just a cryptic story beat that was impossible for the audience to guess. And like season 1 before it, the end of this season felt nice and neat and tidy without any complexity. Soon is quickly beaten, Kore is taken to be a traveler by a nice cameo from Wil Wheaton that had no build up to it at all, Elnor is revived because why not?
Elnor?
The last thing I remember, I was on Lost Surrender.
And Rios decides to stay in the past because I guess he loves it now because he can smoke cigars and can get a date. Also that we don't have to worry about his character in the TNG cast stuffed season 3 that's coming next year. And the Borg Queen from the beginning of the season turns out to be Jurati, who is hiding her face from the audience for some reason, and is there to stop an explosion caused by a mysterious transwarp conduit opening up for some reason that will probably lead to the villains of season 3. It was all just neatly tied up in a bow at the end, and you can just see the hands of the writer trying to make everything slot into place instead of things just naturally flowing out from what the plot was going through. And ultimately, all this just leaves me as frustrated as I felt at the end of season 1. So I want to pause here because I want you to know that I really hate being this critical of Picard, and I want to explain to you why. So many of the loudest voices, and especially the loudest voices here on YouTube, continually complain about how the modern era of Star Trek has ruined the franchise.
As if it wasn't enough for Star Trek Picard to ruin one of the best fucking Starfleet captains of all time, they decide to ruin one of the best fucking franchise's villains. We have the stupidest fucking Jorborgies. Now, this is so fucking stupid. We fucking lost it.
Now, being clear, I am not talking about people who yell about wokeness in a franchise literally built on progressive views of the future. The same people who justified throwing vitriol at trans people like me, celebrating the first explicit trans characters in Star Trek Discovery by saying, well, Star Trek had metaphorical trans people before.
Is to introduce its first ever non-binary and transgender characters to Star Trek Discovery Season 3. There's just one tinsy little problem. Star Trek did this decades ago. But hey, why let that get in the way of a good virtue signal?
Not realizing how important explicit representation is, or how alienating, no pun intended, those older representations were, even if we do stand Jessie Dax here on this channel.
I hope you're not holding back because I'm a woman. If it makes things any easier, think of me as a man. I've been one several times.
These are the same people who are currently upset that a black man is playing a previously established character in Star Trek Strange New Worlds because it ruins canon, since the character was white in an episode of a 1970s cartoon show. Never mind the fact that that cartoon had always had dubious canonicity, nor the fact that that same show featured pink tribbles, nor that the episode that the character that they're so upset appeared in also established that forced retirement age for Starfleet was 75 years old, which was contradicted by The Next Generation in its first season, or the fact that these same people would ignore the canon holodeck on the Enterprise in that same show when they got upset at Star Trek Discovery for showcasing one in 2017, all of which leads me to wonder, sarcastically, if their real problem isn't the canonicity of Star Trek the Animated Series, but something else about the character. Sorry, I know that was a bit of a tangent, but I had to get off my chest how frustrating I find this taking Star Trek as some sort of historical document and then putting into a conspiracy theory mindset about a fictional universe's canonicity while using casual racism to justify their predetermined dislike of a show that hasn't even aired yet. It's fine to want a consistent universe, but Trek is filled with inconsistencies like this.
Using the light speed breakaway factor, the Enterprise has moved back through time to the 20th century. We are now in extended orbit around Earth, using our ship's deflector shields to remain unobserved. Our mission? Historical research.
Professor, at what point does time travel become a tool for historians?
Now, Commander. You know better than that.
Even before this modern era, and if the one inconsistency you're taking issue with is the fact that a man is black when he was white in a cartoon show, there are larger concerns that I have. But anyways, getting back on track, I am actually not talking about those people. Those people are always going to hate the new thing because they need to fuel their outrage machine to make money by repeating the same tired critiques of wokeness and forced diversity, peddling off of anxiety they and their audience are feeling because their favorite franchises no longer cater solely to their viewpoint anymore, but are including other voices more inclusively behind and in front of the screen, something that is long overdue and still not being done enough in a lot of places, honestly. No, the people that I'm actually talking about are people who do have legitimate criticisms of modern Star Trek. People who on many levels I can actually understand and in some cases wholeheartedly agree with their critiques, as well as why those specific concerns could turn them off from the franchise as it is, and the direction that it's taking moving forward. I may not feel the same way about this franchise, but I totally understand those people. Yet, and I'm not saying that all of them are doing this, I am saddened though that a lot of these criticisms often have an underwriting schadenfreude tone. Like there's a certain delight being taken at every single misstep that modern era presumably takes.
What does this do?
Hey, stop pretending to be the writers.
This Star Trek.
Or on the other hand, they have this sad, wistful tone that Star Trek is dead or gone because this modern era doesn't align exactly with what they want Star Trek to be.
A wall of separation. I can pretend this show isn't real, doesn't exist, it never happened, and I can still go back and enjoy my TNG.
I am fully capable of doing that, yes.
I'm starting to change.
Really?
Where unfortunately this knife in my heart has plunged too deep. And I see like pictures of Captain Picard from TNG and like I cringe a little. And I'm done with it. And Star Trek Picard is the body to me, where I was curious, fascinated, and then after watching it, I realized the dark side of humanity. What was once magical to me is no more. And now I've had my own coming of age, and I'm a man now. I'm no longer a boy. And I've seen the body.
And if this is your favorite, I don't know how to reach you. You're so far on a different level. Maybe you just haven't experienced a lot of media.
As someone myself who has found a lot to enjoy in modern Star Trek, from Star Trek 2009, Beyond, Discovery, and especially Prodigy and Lower Decks, I feel these criticisms seem to dismiss a lot of the good that can be found in Trek today. It's not that I don't get why they don't like this modern era of Trek, but for me, these issues don't bother me at all, or I even like the things that they dislike. There are even people who don't like older Trek shows that I love for subjective reasons as well. Believe me, there is a lot that can throw you out of older Trek, like a lot.
How do you know this isn't good for me? How do you know this isn't the best thing that's ever happened to me?
That's a possibility. And then again, it could kill you.
But there's also so much to love in these shows today that inspire me constantly, and I adore them. Like Prodigy, Discovery, Lower Decks, I love them all. Art is subjective, and that's cool, and I love all of Trek, including Picard, for both their flaws and their successes. It's why I have tattoos of every era of Star Trek on my body. And I want to be extra clear here. If you dislike modern Star Trek, hate every single last episode of it, and think there's nothing good within it at all, we're entirely cool. My issue isn't with the opinion as long as you respect mine, and even better if we can have awesome conversations about our opinions, because infinite diversity and infinite combinations is the goal. Those kind of earnest conversations are what make us stronger and better. And it's why I sometimes get bothered by the dismissive or hyperbolicized tone that comes into the conversation around modern Trek in the most vocal discussions around it.
We're not skipping it!
I'm just thinking though,
if this thing is going down in flames, we're going down with it.
And it's why I, along with my friends at places like Trek Culture or Trek Central or Steve Shives, work to bring a sense of positivity that I find sometimes is lacking in more prominent discussions on the franchise right now. And I know a lot of you come to my reviews of modern Star Trek specifically for that positivity. So I say all of that to let you know that I don't critique this season of Picard out of hate, but out of an earnest desire to, number one, be honest with all of you about my feelings, and two, the way that I think about writing these reviews is I imagine them as if I'm saying them to a writer of the show itself. I don't know if they'll ever watch this, they probably won't, but my goal is to try to be constructive, to possibly lay out what I hope can make the show better moving forward and what I thought were the failures and successes of the thing that I currently watched. Because there is stuff that I like about Star Trek Picard Season 2. So, to wrap up this video, let me talk about that for a bit. Despite this season's messiness, there was one thing that constantly shone through: the show's earnest desire to explore trauma and discuss how we can retextualize it in ourselves. A lot of our media today discusses trauma, be it intergenerational, personal, abusive, sexual, and numerous other types. But in these discussions of trauma, often we either tend to glorify it,
the
broken are the more evolved.
Or say that we're better without it. But when we discuss trauma, we really shouldn't see it in either of those terms. Trauma is not something to be necessarily justified by saying it made us stronger or better. It can do those things, but it can also be debilitating. But on the other hand, for so many people who do suffer trauma, to say that you were better before your trauma also makes you feel less than for the pain that you've endured. So few works of fiction that I've seen have actually worked to just take trauma as it is. Something that just happens to us. Something that we need to work to incorporate into our sense of self after it happens, and not judge ourselves, positively or negatively, for having gone through something difficult to process. And what I loved about this season is that so many of this show's storylines talked about that very idea. For me, notably, when the season began with 7 of 9 losing her Borg implants, a source of so much of her trauma going all the way back to Star Trek Voyager, being removed, I worried initially that the show was ultimately going to argue that 7 was better without them, a stronger person without them. Or that it would say that she was better for having been a Borg and suffering the pain inflicted upon her as a child, that it made her somehow the better person that she is today. Yet, the show didn't do either of those things. The show showcased that 7 was different having been removed from the physical scars of her trauma.
There's a lot of baggage with those Borg implants. It's kind of nice to see her travel light for a while.
And it also showcased 7 of 9's clear PTSD at having been a Borg.
When you're assimilated, the Borg inject you with stabilizing metals so your body can handle nanobros. I can still remember the smell. It was sick.
But yet the show ultimately showed that who she was after having gone through her Borg experience is still a full and complete and good person. That who she was informed by the totality of herself, trauma and all. And I loved that storyline for 7. It really fit her character and something that she probably needed to hear, especially after we saw her back in season 1.
You really okay with this?
Maybe better than okay.
But the place that I think this theme was best shown was in my personal favorite storyline of the season, and the one that I thought was pretty good front to back, the Jurati and Borg Queen story. Jurati in early episodes clearly is suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts.
I think about suicide every day. That's how I comfort myself.
She's lonely and isolated after the events that left her with a lot of trauma back in season 1 of Picard.
It's just too much, too heavy to push through. And then a thought occurs. I could just stop trying. I could lie down, stop fighting, let it take me, like sleeping to death.
And the Borg Queen preys upon this, arguing that the Borg Collective is the community that she's always longed for, manipulating her so that she can use and steal her body. And these scenes were some of the season's most fun and succinct and yet terrifying moments.
What you have just done here is more difficult and vastly more dangerous than you realize.
And what is that?
You've impressed me.
It's the Borg Queen being deeply emotionally manipulative, leading to the Borg Queen, who eventually symbolically represents Jurati losing herself to her trauma, to take over and begin to almost enact a worldwide trauma, causing the literal end of the Federation.
What's happening? This was my plan all along. Finally, the endorphins I needed. I think I'll steer the ship for a while.
No, wait, I'm in control.
Not anymore.
Similarly, the Borg Queen herself is also trying to lash out after the trauma she endured being the last Borg to survive the Confederation, trying to extend her non-consensual Borg collective across the stars in reciprocity for her trauma. All of this represents how those who suffer abuse can sometimes continue to perpetuate it further themselves because they haven't been modeled a better way. Yet in the end of the season, I adored that Jurati is able to turn this back on the Borg Queen, because she isn't really isolated. She has friends like 7 and Picard, and because they care for her and she cares for them, and because she has connections and has seen a better way in the Federation itself, she manages to argue that instead of letting trauma define you, you should accept it and create something new.
What if we take this ship and build a better Borg? A real collective, based not on assimilation, but salvation. Think about it.
A Borg collective that embraces the uniqueness of its members.
You ask us to embrace weakness.
I'm positing that what you've written off as weakness is actually strength. Cooperation.
This allows her to redefine the Borg collective into something consensual, fundamentally changing who the Borg are. This is not only great thematically, as well as a great end to Jurati's arc, but also finally allows the Borg to evolve into something new within the Trek universe. Much has been made about how the Borg really stopped being a great villain due to their overuse in Star Trek Voyager. But now, after this season, in true Star Trek fashion, this dark reflection of the Federation's desire to have infinite diversity and infinite combinations morphed into pressing everyone into the same mold without care for difference or becoming something greater than the sum of your parts, has now been changed into something greater, allows the Borg to become something positive. And isn't that the message of Star Trek? How we can take this trauma, this traumatic, horrible thing, and still move forward, and still find positivity and hope in our futures despite everything that we've been and gone through. It allows the Borg to become something I think new in Trek canon, and I'm excited to see how they're explored moving forward instead of Trek just having to reiterate the same tired Borg storylines. Jurati's pain helped to reshape the entire Borg into something completely different because she accepted who she was, completely, trauma and all. Yet, the most prominent use of these themes of accepting and recontextualizing trauma came through mostly in Picard's storyline with his mother this season. Much has been made about how Picard in this series has become somewhat of a mirror of Patrick Stewart himself in real life, and no more is that true than this season. Patrick Stewart has been open about how his father used to abuse his mother and how that defined how he saw his father as a kid.
I think that I was indulged and spoiled and petted and loved during those 5 years. All of that changed dramatically when this man appeared in the house. In many respects, not for the better either. At weekends, when he had been drinking, he could get very angry. I don't ever recall being hit by him. Even when at times I would intervene in rows between my mother and my father, I would put my body between them at what I thought were critical moments. And I don't remember him ever being, even pushing me hard or being violent with me, but he was to my mother. He hit her, he threw things at her. Sometimes we had to call an ambulance or a doctor would come. Certainly on a couple of occasions, the police too would come. I think of my mother often and the loneliness she must have felt at times. But she adored my father.
But as he grew older, Patrick Stewart learned that his father suffered PTSD, then called shell shock, and it led him to see his father with more complexity.
A little while ago, a few days ago, I was shown a newspaper report which recounted how my father had returned home from France, suffering from shell shock as a result of aerial bombardment. I'm curious to know about what the lasting impact of shell shock might be, and especially how it might be associated with domestic violence.
Not absolving him of what he did to his mother, but at least allowing Stewart to understand where that abuse came from. He was able to recontextualize the story of his mother and father and himself and accept it as something part of his life. And we see a similar story play out in Picard Season 2. Picard in the premiere is unable to love Laris because he hasn't moved past the trauma of his mother's suicide that he feels partially responsible for. Initially, we learn of this backstory through the impressionistic version that he sees it of in his mind through the eyes of a child, through stylistic monsters and fables, thereby casting his father, played by the amazing Gaius Baltar James Callis himself, as the villain. But as Picard continually returns back to it throughout the season, he begins to understand the truth, to not see it through the eyes of a kid's emotional impressions, but more holistically, as a child who let his mother out of a locked room because he loved her, and that it wasn't his fault for her death.
Love can be a source of great grief and immense pain.
Have tremendous guilt. A reason to run from ourselves. Or away from each other. Love can be a curse. But always and completely, it's a gift.
And he has to accept that this trauma happened to him, and that it's okay. Not okay that it happened, but okay that it's part of his life experience. And I loved that Picard putting the key back in its place in the finale, the key that would be used to open his mother's door all those years later, was not time travel mumbo jumbo that ultimately argued that Picard himself caused his own mother's death to happen, but was just a symbolic acceptance of him coming to terms with his past, absolving himself of the crime for being him. It was honestly beautiful. And I loved the final scene between him and Q that crystallized this entire theme. Q, dying himself in a sadly not explored enough storyline that was told more than shown, spent his last efforts giving a gift to Picard because, in his deranged Q way, he cared about Picard.
You matter to me.
This entire season's storyline wasn't caused by galactic importance, it was about Q caring for a friend. And some may take issue with the way that Q chose to do this, but it kind of fits Q's characterization, doesn't it? This is the same Q who put Picard in the path of the Borg in season 2 of The Next Generation, and when Picard pointed out that Q doing this led to the death of Picard's crew members, Q had this to say.
I understand what you've done here, Q. But I think the lesson could have been learned without the loss of 18 members of my crew.
If you can't take a little bloody nose, maybe you ought to go back home and crawl under your bed. It's not safe out here. It's wondrous, with treasures to satiate desires both subtle and gross. But it's not for the timid.
This is also the same Q that sent Picard back in time to force him to re-accept him getting stabbed in the heart by Nausicaans in order to teach him a personal lesson. This whole season may be a weird, fucked up dying gift from Q to Picard, but it fits him, doesn't it? So in the end, while the way this storyline with Picard's mother was weaved into this season's overall arc was sometimes overwrought, meandering, and reiterative, as much of the season as a whole was, the emotional truth of it was actually beautiful. In the end, like I said, Star Trek Picard Season 2 was a mess. It honestly is my least favorite season of any modern Star Trek. In many ways, it felt like it had the opposite problem of Season 1. Instead of too many ideas, it feels like it had too few, and stretched them out over 10 episodes. I feel like if this had been a 2-hour movie, or maybe a 3 or 4 episode arc, it could have been amazing. But this way, not so much. Yet I hope my critique is taken in the spirit in which it was given. And while I don't love this season, I appreciate it took a risk. One that didn't necessarily pay off, but I don't want executives to take the wrong lesson here. Keep taking risks with Trek. I'd rather it keep trying something new than trying the same thing over and over again. It's my one worry with Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I think that show is going to be great, but I hope it doesn't signal the franchise becoming stale like Star Wars has, when I think there are so many places that Star Trek can still boldly go. And I also hope that as we look out at all the discussion of Picard Season 2 and modern Star Trek in general, that we don't fall into the trap of criticism being simply saying thing good or thing bad. This season, for all of its faults, did have some true beauty in there too. A true emotional honesty that I think few shows have or are willing to engage with. Despite its sloppiness, this show wore its heart on its sleeve. And if this season was about accepting the imperfection of who you are, of seeing the totality of yourself regardless of the pain you suffered, then I think we owe it to this show to try to give it the same courtesy. Thank you so much everybody for watching this review. Like I said, this was not my favorite thing to do. I don't like being mostly negative in a review of things, but I also know I had to write a review of Picard Season 2 and I wanted to just be honest with my feelings about it instead of trying to hide that fact from everybody. So I hope my honesty was, again, taken in the spirit in which it was given, which was meant to be constructive, not attacking or deconstructive. But with that all being said, a few quick things to announce because I got some exciting news. First off, I just wish to say, not to get overhyped or anything, but the next few videos that I have coming out on this channel over the next month or so, I think are some of the best that I've ever done. They've been kind of long gestating projects that I'm really excited to share with all of you, culminating in Sex and Star Trek Part 2, which should be coming out in sometime in mid to early June. So please, please, please give a subscribe for all that because I'm honestly so excited to share all that stuff with you. But two, as some of you may know, I do have a surgery coming up next month. So once all these videos come out, which will be the next, like over the next 2 months or so, I'm gonna be taking a small break for myself and my mental health just to sort of recuperate from the surgery, as well as to allow myself just some time to get back my creative energies after such big projects. So you still got a lot to look forward to over the next few months, but just be aware that that is on the horizon. I'm gonna take a little bit of a few week break once all those big projects come out. So look for that around July, where I'll be just sort of off the internet for a little bit. But I also wish to say to that, thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me doing what I do. I would not be able to take that break and take the time to recover without all of your help. So if you do support me on Patreon, please, thank you. I cannot tell you how much it means a lot to me, because this is my full-time job, and you allow me to be able to take breaks and not worry so much about the algorithm. So thank you for that. And if you want to help me like those wonderful people and get your name in the videos and other things like that, you can help support me over on Patreon. But don't forget, I also have a secondary channel called Jessiegender After Dark, where I do my news, reviews, reactions, including reviews of every episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which I am loving right now. It's freaking amazing, so go check that out. And I also have a podcast called Jumpgate, where I rewatch every episode of Babylon 5 with my friend Vera Wild from the Council of Geeks channel. But beyond all of that, just thank you for being here. I hope you appreciated this review, and I look forward to your thoughts down in the comments below about this season. But beyond all of that, my friends, I hope you all live long and prosper. Here we go. I know I've used this song once before, but I like it so much, so here's some more. I just want to say to my Patreons, I love you so much, and here's this song to say thank you. If it's the beat. Alex Miller, Alicia Strice, Ali Gober, Annie with an I, Ish Indra, Ashley Allenbo, Kiki Yo, Barbaruski, Beatrix Pruvis, Bella Lugosi, Blue, Blueberry Hill, Boyd and Mary Bethero, Casual Observer, Catherine Lambeth, Celestial Dawn, Chloe Dollar, Chris Boodley, Crit Fax, Cyber Quaker, D. Ray, Dominic Noble, Drew Betch, Lysia Tativi, Elizabeth Christensen, Elijah M, Ish the Mad, Farangato, Felicia Toast, Flynn, G-Man 42, Hacker Men, Here Reeses, Holly Walters, James Hodge, James Krivda, Jason Nutt, Jedi Indiana Jones, Jemshin, Jennifer Fuss, Jenny Mabel, Jessica Wright, Joe Herman Hold, John Weatherby, Joseph Dewey, Julie Mason, Justine, Kaylis, Kari Erin Foss, Kevin Froteg, Laura Demerol, Leoetha Boyd, Lily Gray, Luna T, Lysa, Maeve, Maggie the Goblin, Matt Chung, Meadow Whisperer, Melinda Walters, Melody Ann Winters Good, Mary Mello, Michael Godey, Miranda Janelle, Maureen the Pirate Queen, Nathan Steele, Nathil Fraughton, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Odd Just Odd, Peter Landers, Pissed and Twisted Garage, Randy Thompson, Sarah Bystam, Sarah Lemerow, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Sasha M, Sean Piper, Shield Maiden 44444, Sky Skinner, Sonia Naroperdo, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Steven Richardson, Steven Clenard, Strawberry Pup Tart, Super Desi, Sylvester Ratto, Tiffany Danger, Transit Toronto, Troy Stull, Ulysses the Pagan, Verdux Kai, Vincent Ellington, W. Randy, E.D., Wellington Marcus, Wendy's Abyssal, William Stewart, Zoe Kerr, Zone 1 Librarian. Thank you so much to all of you, my patrons. And one final note to wrap up on. I did recently learn that sadly one member of my patron community sadly passed away recently. So for one final time, I just wish to say thank you so much to Eva Kniva for all that you gave me and all the support that you gave me. It meant the world to me, and I send you, and especially your family right now, some love.